Yeah. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know
yeah,
how it
yeah,
is, man.
yeah,
We here.
yeah.
We here. I know we back to the grill again. The
The
grill
grill
again.
again.
Back to the grill again. The grill again, man. You know what I'm saying? We here tonight. We doing it. I'm in the bunker, a disclosed location. You know what I'm saying? I'm not usually in my place. So if the vocals sound a little bit off, y'all gonna have to forgive that. On this episode, what we here, we excited, to talk about, some stuff. The homie Vision checking in, reporting for
Yeah.
me. You know what I'm saying? It's the homie
The
right
faithful
there.
brother. The faithful brother.
The homie checking in for duty. We
Mm-hmm.
season 5, episode 26. Man, we about to get into something, man. But before we do that, before we jump into that, I today I announced and kind of released the graphic for and even set up the pre-orders for the new project I've been telling y'all about. So I want to show y'all this graphic real quick. This is the
Yes.
graphic for the new album. It is entitled "I'm Warning You, Do Not Listen to This Album." So I wanted y'all to see this. Let me just talk a little bit about what this album is.
Peekaboo.
So this is, man, I would say a couple things real quick so you understand what this is. This is a new album that comes out next Friday on August 4th. I did that intentionally because it's my youngest son's birthday. He turns 12. So it's kind of a double celebration where we'll talk about it'll be his birthday, but also the release of an album. This is my last album as Kirk Kennedy, like an official Kirk Kennedy album. So I've had a good run, a good discography. I chose to on this album, which we'll talk more about next week's episode. I chose to go a real different angle. I've always done my music primarily from the standpoint of just being a believer and sort of looking at the culture and calling out aspects of the culture for the church. But on this particular project, I felt like because of the last few years of like COVID and all that happened and how the church was just ravaged and all the stuff about church hurt and all this stuff kind of came to the forefront. I watched and met a lot of guys, a lot of men at least, who serve in the pastorate that really felt like, wow, we're really the ones like taking all the hit in the church, like because there are pastors who have sinfully carried themselves a certain way and have affected a lot of people, but all pastors aren't like that. And so I felt like there's a lot of pastors that over the last 3 years who lost their churches, lost friendships because they weren't epidemiologists. They weren't saying if you vote opposite a political party, you're not a Christian. All these different things that happen to a lot of pastors. And even me, I experienced a lot of challenge. And I felt like for me to finish my career musically, I thought it would be cool to do an album from a pastor's perspective. Like, so every song doesn't cover that topic, but you will walk away from this album, at least from my perspective, knowing the real issues that pastors face because church hurt is not top down only. It's cyclical. Church hurt. You can be a pastor and a guy. People will tell you, "Hey, man, I'm leaving," and you don't even know. No one even sent you. They didn't even sit down with you and say what was the issue, and you got to deal with that. You wake up on Sundays, you're struggling, and you still got to preach. You can't just be like, "I ain't coming in today." If you don't, you can just decide. Anybody, I'm not going to church today. I don't feel like going. Pastors just can't do that, and if they do, it's more consequences. So, but this album's got a lot. Every artist feels like their newest work is their best work. So I'm
It
not going to
should.
say that. I'm going to leave that up to you all to determine. But I will promise you this: if you do have the courage to ignore this warning and listen to this album next Friday, August 4th, if you do, you are going to hear some bangers. You're going to hear some anthems. You're going to hear some solid music, but you're also going to hear probably some of the most vulnerable thoughts that I've ever shared in music. So I'm excited about that. About it.
Yes. How long, oh Lord?
Yeah. And if you actually pre-order, you go to bandcamp.com, type in Kirk Kennedy, and you pre-order from Bandcamp, you'll get to hear a song featuring a homie, Strack the Wolverine, called How Long, one of my favorite joints on the project. So I'm excited for that.
Mhm. I
All
found
right,
myself saying that a lot this week, actually.
I
How
bet.
long?
I
How
bet.
long? Yeah.
So let's get into we're not, we were going to talk about this last week, but obviously some things came up. We weren't able to address it. But we still typically just do things our own way and have our own perspective on this. So let's talk about this movie, Sound of Freedom. If you haven't heard of it, just really I'll let Strack describe what the movie is about, essentially.
So basically, um, years back, I think around 2014, there was a rescue done that media covered. A man who was like former military, also U.S. agent, um, went in and rescued children that were being trafficked and started an organization. The organization now is pretty big. They're doing a lot of dope things as far as rescuing children and being able to fund other children. We'll get into some of that. But the movie basically covers a story that happened where he rescued two specific children. And yeah, that's I don't want to go too deep, into the details of it, but that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah. So the movie has called A Frenzy, both good and bad. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the good side of it is that the movie, as of today at least, what I heard is it's generated $125 million. I think it had a $15 million budget, I think, to actually shoot the film. Very
Yeah, I
for
think their goal, which was high for them in their minds, was like 30 million to make
right. Yeah,
in
that
their
was a
first
big
in
number.
their first week or however much time they were saying like
Yeah. And it's at 125 million, outpaced
right.
Mission Impossible, which was a crazy movie. Like me and my oldest son, we went to
Yeah,
go see that joint was tough. Mission Impossible was a
I'm
tough.
definitely gonna be seeing that joint soon.
Right. Mission Impossible was tough. I'll give Tom Cruise his credit.
It also
So
did Indiana Jones dirty too. Indiana Jones got left behind.
yeah, I didn't even
He,
see it. I didn't even see that.
yeah,
I'm an indie fan, so we'll probably check that
right.
out when I'm on sabbatical in August. But I wasn't like rushing to go see that. But Sound of Freedom is so it's called A Frenzy, both on the positive side, where a lot of people are talking about it and telling people to go see it, and so it's doing well in the box office.
Yeah,
And then, but it's a frenzy on the other side too. There's a lot of political fervor, a lot of accusatory motive of people's motives and the movie, and trying to discredit it in some
right.
senses. We'll get into that in a second. But I just think it's interesting that when I thought about this movie and it coming out, and you think about the landscape of where we are now. I'm old enough to remember a song by Whitney Houston called "The Greatest Love of All."
Hmm.
And it was, I mean, she had many popular songs, but this song was really, really popular for Whitney Houston. And one of the opening line was, "I believe the children are our future.
Right.
Treat them well and let them lead the way." And even though obviously harm towards children in ways that should only happen between grown-ups, that's that was happening then, but there was a collective sense, though, at least that like the children are the future. I mean, that I remember that phrase being put out there a ton, right? The children are the future and so forth. And now we look at the what seems to be clearly over the last 5 years, significant acknowledgement. I mean, more than 5 years, but let's just say the last 5 years with the the indictment of Jeffrey Epstein, right? Like the
Right. That
indictment
was a
of
big
Jeffrey,
deal. Yeah.
that was a big deal. Jeffrey Epstein
Well,
and
even the
I,
Olympics, the guy who was doing the
yeah,
gymnastics with
Larry
with the
Nassar,
ladies, the doctor Larry
yeah, Dr.
Nasser.
Larry
Yep.
Nassar, and
Yep.
you had a Christian woman who exposed him, and
Right.
he was so over the last 5 years, despite that Whitney Houston sang in the '80s, "I believe the children are our future." There's been in the last 4 decades a significant reality that opposes that line, that iconic singing line, which is the harmful exploitation of children. We did an
Mm-hmm.
episode in I think season 3 where we brought a woman on who is working on the front lines on
And
this
trafficking. Yeah.
on trafficking. And so we were aware of it, and we were sober by that then. But I think what's happened now with the Jeffrey Epstein, the indictment of him and Ghislaine Maxwell, and really seeing that a lot of their clientele were like political figures.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, or like tech gurus. I mean, this guy had an island that they would fly people to this. He was a billionaire, even though now they're saying like he was Israeli CIA type agent, right?
An Israeli agent, yeah.
I mean, kind of like what we would call CIA, whatever they
Mm-hmm.
call. I forgot what they call it for them, but they kind of saying he was just getting the goods on everybody. And but they would fly him to this island. They would fly these men primarily to this island, and then on this island, it was his island,
Right.
and they would be in sexual intercourse with underage girls. I think it was boys too, but I was
actually
more boys.
That concept was actually used in the storyline for the movie. I'm not sure if that was a part of true events. I know the movie is based on a true story.
Yeah.
But that concept, like of having an island where children are brought, was used as a way of tricking and saving some children.
Well, in terms of like satanic and just the schemes of the devil, it's a great idea, right? In terms of how you manipulate the evil that you can do on an island is very much a scheme.
Well, I mean, the reason it hooked the people in, is because they're all about the money. So if the idea presents a good opportunity to make more money, they're running with it. So the high traffickers, the people who are making money in that, all you got to do is present them with a good idea, and that's how they ran with it. So
right. So the movies cause a lot of political, like a political fervor in many ways.
Which is odd.
You have the people on the left who are saying this is a QAnon conspiracy.
Right.
Even like Rolling Stone magazines, they're kind of dismissing it. So the liberal left media, whatever that means to you, they're kind of dismissing it as a political conspiracy. Things aren't really like almost making it seem like the movie is making more of an issue than what it really is.
I mean, the funny thing is how old the movie is. The movie was made like 5 years ago. So
it was made in 2014, actually.
The movie was?
The movie was made in 2014, way before anyone even heard of QAnon.
So I thought the event happened in 2014, but the movie was made about 5 years ago, like in 2018, I thought.
Okay,
I could be wrong.
I missed something. I could have been, because when we watched the interview with the guy who it was about,
right,
he said the movie was made in 2014, and they were just waiting on it. But it might have been it happened.
Yeah, it definitely sat for some time because Disney had it, and then they,
Fox,
yeah, go ahead.
Had it, and all these people had it. So there was a sense where, but like it's been sitting for a while, long before any of us were aware of QAnon. It's clearly not this. And even if you thought like that was a conspiracy, man, we have movies like Taken, Liam Neeson. Right. Like you have movies where this is a foregone conclusion. Like this not. Even if you thought it was a QAnon conspiracy, to almost make it seem like you're making more of a situation than what it is just evil in and of itself. And this is the reason why this is why people hate the left. This is why the woke left. And this is why I would never, ever support the left. This is why I'm not with none of them either, because I think they just work for the enemy. They work for the devil. But so do the Republicans too. Though.
Right.
So we're screwed in that sense. But what was you gonna say, bro?
Oh, I was just gonna say I think a lot of it is fueled by money. I mean, a lot of it, like even with how the movie is being hated and being talked about politically. Yeah, is there some reality that some people may be upset because they're hyping it up too much as far as a problem is, because there's people in Hollywood who are partaking in this nonsense.
100%. We're going to talk about that in a second.
Right. So that stuff, does shed light on things that they would want to keep hidden. But at the end of the day, as far as the movie being hated on, I think that's really coming down from the top because they lost money. They lost money on that joint. Like they let it sit on the shelf, got rid of it, said it's not for them, and then Angel Studios puts it out, and boom, it smashes all your films. Like that's kind of crazy.
So I think money is it, but I think the other side of it is though. I think it's just in our country now, we have gotten to a point in a two-party political system where we're just it's either or. It's either this or that. There is
Right.
real in
Everything gets pushed in and wedged in there.
and as long as it represents something of my opposition, it's evil. It
Right.
doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Even a glimpse of it. Yeah.
Even a glimpse of it. So even though there's significant truth in the exploitation of children sexually all over the world,
Yeah.
that it just because it looks like the conservatives are pushing it. If I'm on the left, the liberal side, we hate it. We're going to go, and if the liberals, and there's truth on both sides. There are things
Yeah.
that both sides say.
Christians have done that too with guilty by association. You know
100%.
that concept.
100%. So there's a lot of this going on, and I do believe that so much of this is the Lord exposing some things about this. And so, so let's talk a little bit about before we actually get to the movie, and I want to get your thoughts on the movie because you just saw it.
Yeah, it's fresh on my brain, bro. I mean, yeah.
So yeah, I don't. People, we're doing do spoiler alert. We don't care about that. Like people,
yeah.
It's one of those movies you should see it because of what it represents, not because you know what happened. You know, so
for sure.
I want to do a little sort of a brief Hollywood treatise on this topic because this is not a topic that has gotten to the forefront very easily. And so this is where, I mean, first, let's just be clear.
It's been suppressed.
And let's talk about why. Let's talk about why it's been suppressed. And I think I think we have to realize that when the Bible says stuff like this in Ephesians 6:12, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. When we read things like that, or when Paul says, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh. We have to understand what the Bible is really saying. It's that we live in a world where we see things, but there's an unseen world. We live in the material world. There's an immaterial world, and there are divine cosmic beings that are able to live in the world that we don't see. We call them demons, angels, spirits, ghosts, whatever those things are, right? There's a world that's more real than this world.
Divines.
Yeah, we call it the world that's more real than this world, that these things, and what Paul is saying in Ephesians 6:12 and another place in 2 Corinthians 10:3-5 is that we are people of the flesh who live in this world, but we're fighting a war that's not against other flesh and blood, but against the supernatural evil, powers, cosmic powers that are behind these things.
It's more real than we think.
And it's more real than we give it credit for. Yeah. We're so focused on look at the left and look at what they're doing, or look at the right, or look at these, and not realizing the Bible says we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers, right, over this present darkness, spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. We don't really think like that. And I think we need to start believing how the Bible is describing things. Otherwise, we'll be duped into dismissing.
I think that's a good idea.
Or we're just not taking them like seriously. And so what we see is, even though Strack and I both mentioned there's money involved, there's politics, but there's also a evil supernatural force behind the trafficking of children and wanting to suppress that.
There has to be, man, because of the evil that you see. I mean, there has to be some type of other forces involved that help the blinding and suppressing, because it's just it's too dark, bro. It's too dark.
So like, I remember, I don't know if you're old enough to remember these guys. Remember that there were two in the 80s and 90s. There were two popular Coreys, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. Remember them?
Yep, I do.
And they were like childhood stars of like the 80s and then going into the 90s. So like, I think Corey Haim would have been like in the Lost Boys. He was one of those kind of kids in Lost Boys.
He was the tough kid in the Lost Boys movie. Like, he was the tough kid.
Right. And then you get Corey Haim. That was Corey.
Not the Lost Boys, the Lean On Me. It was the Lean On Me movie.
Lean On Me, right.
Yeah, he was the tough kid with the spiky little hair, you know.
Right, and then he was also in like the Goonies, you know.
Right.
Classic movie. There were just a lot. Those guys were very
80s
prominent.
icons, teen, like kid
Yeah.
icons. Yeah.
And one of them is dead now,
Yeah.
but they talked about being sexually assaulted as kids in Hollywood. Like this was back
Yeah.
then. They didn't bring it up then, but as they got older, they would do like these interviews and started to expose us around 2013. So let me just read to you two things that just to give you context for that this has been trying to get out for years,
Yep.
just like everything else the enemy does suppresses it, right? And the people that don't want it to get out, they benefit from. There's a reason why Jeffrey Epstein was a billionaire and attracted people with money
Yep.
because there is what we call fetishes. We call things like a fetish, right, or like a crush, or there's a real sinister thing behind a fetish, or what we would call a crush, or some of these things that I think if we look at them from a biblical perspective, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but here's some backdrop of Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. They were like best friends, had a show together called The Two Coreys, a kind of a reality TV show. And this is let me read this to you. It says in an episode of The Two Coreys, Haim told Feldman that he had been sexually abused at the age of 14 by one of Feldman's acquaintances. Declining to identify his molester, a 42-year-old man, Haynes said that the abuse had continued for 2 years with Feldman's knowledge. This disclosure led to a further rift between Haynes and Feldman, and the show continued to expose the darker side of their lives as teen stars. In 2011, after Haynes' death, Feldman stated that a Hollywood mogul who abused Haynes was to blame for his death. Feldman's 2013 mentor, a memoir, Choreography, stated that he and Haynes suffered sexual abuse as young actors in the film industry. Feldman stated that during the filming of Lucas, Haynes had been tricked into engaging in a painful session of anal sex by a man on the movie set. The man told Haynes that sex between men and boys was normal in Hollywood. Feldman reported that after this experience, and so just it goes into really these two guys with credibility, and usually when people come out, some people will be like, yeah, there's some truth to what they're saying, but this was pre-social media,
Right.
or pre the kind of hashtag Me Too.
This
Pre
was like go on 60 Minutes is the only way to get your stuff out
right.
there.
It was that kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And they were exposing a lot of stuff, and other people had said they exposed it. In 2017, I'll never forget, X-Men director Bryan Singer was accused of sexual assault of a 17-year-old boy. And then when it came out, I think I think it was Corey Haim, there was all of this stuff happening, right? Like stuff was just slowly being revealed, slowly coming out, slowly being revealed about like just the stuff that you don't want to think about. These elite in Hollywood, these people that we tended to, these politicians. Then you had the whole Pizzagate thing that proved to be a fake. But then again, you don't really know because the people who do these things are usually, in America at least, wealthy. I remember in the 2016, when was the Olympics in Brazil? Whenever that was, there was a Summer Olympics in Brazil. I want to say it was 2016.
I don't remember.
I can't remember 2018. I remember reading an article, which I was just heartbroken by, that they were saying that people were protesting the Olympics coming to Brazil because they said if they do, then sex trafficking of minors is going to increase by like 8,000%. And the article said the biggest partakers of that are Americans. Like they literally come to these countries in order to do that. So
I think it's known by a lot of people that Super Bowl is one of the biggest events where that takes place.
100%. And so again, like here's the reality, right? Here's the reality. And this is where, like, if you think about Jeffrey Epstein and his trial and all of that, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just courting one side of the political party.
Right.
If you had a certain degree of money and you were, I don't know, I can't remember what the sort of entry was, but you were allowed to participate in the abuse of minors sexually. So this is a real thing. It's not new. I mean, we can go back to pederasty and the Roman and with the Romans in the Bible, and the Greeks were doing these things, right? So this is all stuff that's been happening for a long time. But in right now, this seems to be exposed in significant ways, but there's going to be spiritual opposition to it because I don't know how much you know this, Strack, but we've been looking at demon possession a lot and just different things like that, just processing it. And most of this, like most of the times that I've interacted with women in particular who have felt like they had demons or had a lot of them had sexual abuse in their past. And if you watch like Catholic priests who do like exorcisms, they would say that there is a 1-to-1. Not that everyone who's experienced sexual abuse gets possessed, but there is for them a very strong connection between the abuse of children and the demonic possession that comes like later. There's something about that aspect, something about the vulnerability of that action and the innocence taken from that opens the door for demonic possession.
That's interesting because I just recently watched a show called Crowded Room, and it's with the young man from Spider-Man that he plays Spider-Man. I forget what his name is.
Okay, right. Yeah, Tom Holland.
Tom Holland, exactly.
I saw episode 1 of that show. I haven't seen the rest.
Yeah, phenomenal actor. So I mean, this show I think just takes his acting to another level, right? So the show's premise is basically it's about people who have multiple personalities. That's why it's called The Crowded Room. So in the show, it's revealed that the majority of people who develop multiple personalities have been sexually violated as children.
Wow.
So, and the thing is, when I was watching this, I couldn't help but think about the correlations between what I was seeing being acted out and what I read in scripture with demonic possession and in other, areas where I've heard about demonic possession experiences. So it was just wild to hear you say that as well and make that connection between sexual abuse and then demonic possession, or multiple personalities, which I think the argument could be made that a lot of times that is actually demonic possession.
It's interesting you said it. And that's a different episode for us, and we might even hit that in like 2 or 3 weeks.
I think we should. I think it'd be a great episode.
I think there is. I think we call things. I think the enemy in America slides under politics and science, right?
Oh yeah.
So with this kind of stuff, you politically hash. You build and you have money. You got these corporations that lobby for politicians to make laws that serve them, right? So you have that, but then there's the scientific part of it, right? Where we call these things all these neurobiological issues. It's just multiple personality, dissociative identity disorder, all these things,
right?
That largely look like could be the influence of a.
I mean, that's one of the things about the show that's brought out is the doctor who's involved, the psychiatrist, who's studying this person. She's trying to get tenure. She's trying to get grants. So this is during an era when the idea of multiple personality disorder was not even recognized by science.
Right.
So it was taking place in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, I think it is. So, but yeah, the correlation between them. But what you have to think of is these are people in the world that are trying to understand things that are spiritual, I think, and when they're trying to understand things that are spiritual, how else can you explain them?
Right.
But through what we've experienced. So for them, it's sexual abuse causes this to happen. And for us, we're like, maybe the sexual abuse was caused by the actual, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's a whole nother game then all of a sudden. Now it's from the gate this was involved. It's not like just, I think human nature definitely bends towards sinful proclivities that can open the floodgates. But when you open the floodgates, there's other entities that get involved and help you become more wicked. You know what I mean? So
yeah. So what I would love to do now, Strack, because like you just saw the movie, walk us through the experience of the movie and sort of what impacted you. And again, if you haven't seen it, then you can start watching right now because I want Strike to do sport. It's not about like trying to tell you who done it, but it's just a real thing. I want you to feel the freedom to sort of walk
Yeah.
through.
Well, leading up to the movie, I watched a bunch of stuff on the guy that the movie is based on, Tim Ballard. And, I wanted to see what he was about. I wanted to see what this guy was about, what his organization was about, kind of the stuff we do, the research stuff we do. So I went into the movie kind of already having some expectations on what I was going to see. I expected somewhat of a Taken type vibe, but more of a...
Liam Neeson when his daughter and her friend take, he goes.
Yeah, I think he did like 3 or 4 of them joints. You know what I mean? It got crazy.
Every Liam Neeson movie now is a Taken type joint.
Everybody in his family got taken for every, so. But anyway,
Cousin
I expected that. I expected that kind of thing, but Christian film, like I expected, the cheesiness, that I'm used to seeing. But there was none, bro. It was an excellent film. I thought it was really good. I mean, the acting was superb. Like, whenever you get Hispanics from like the island, like those that real, they gonna do a great job acting. You know what I'm saying? Like that's just how it is, because they live amongst it. They, it's just it's just basically they're being themselves. So, but that was just a fantastic cast, great job. But the way the movie begins by introducing the children the way that it does, they're immediately sexualized. It's like it doesn't take very long before they go from being in their father's arms, normal kids, to they're being transitioned and taught how to be sexual in an innocent way. It's about like, hey, I heard your talent. I heard your gift of singing. Man, I can make you famous. Like, can we meet over here? Tell your dad, and then that's used as the hook to draw them in. And you're talking about an impoverished people, so
that's usually that possibility of getting out of poverty.
Right. But it's always, honestly though, it's always the same tactic. Like even with, people in cults, because I watch this kind of stuff all the time. You call me the documentary dude or whatever. So people in cults do the same tactics. Like they have young ladies go out and invite you to a Bible study, and then all of a sudden you're learning stuff that's super wild. You had no idea. Before you know it, you're caught and you're stuck because your mind has been brainwashed. So these children, though, they bring them in, they sexualize them from the gate. They have like this whole system, man. I mean, online, people doing catalogs of little babies. You're talking about 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, catalogs of, you can pick your choice of which ones you want of the next, group that's coming up. Like we're going to have shipment. And I mean, they're really treated as commodities. They're treated as things you can purchase and do what you want with. And one of the big things that comes out in the film is the concept that, when it comes to drugs and the drug game, you sell your drugs, them drugs is used, they gone. You can't resell the same drug. Like if I sell a dime, that dime is gone. I'm going to make what I made from it. Poof. A child, like from the film, the statement is made, can be sold 5 to 10 times in a day for up to 10 years. And, you're selling them for specific things. Some is child labor, some is, sexual gratifications and other things. So it's just even organs. I mean, children are being taken and stolen to sell organs, So that happens right away. You're right away introduced to the trauma of losing a child, like the father is going crazy. I'm glad they didn't focus too much on him in the beginning. They kind of left him out of the story for the most part, because I don't know how I would have been able to make it. But for me, especially, and probably for Flora, we didn't really talk about it much because it's fresh. Like we just watched it, but the children were the same age pretty much as our grandchildren. So, and they were a boy and a girl, and the daughter was older than the brother. So there was an aspect of her guarding him. So it was very personal for us in that regard, as far as the feelings is concerned. So needless to say, I cried more during this movie than I've ever cried in a movie. I hardly ever, it's just a tear or two. But as the movie builds, you realize like the people who have the ability to maybe do something are so caught up with so much paperwork and so much, legality and politics and things that they would have us point to, that it's almost like their hands are tied, when in reality you have to question, how much do you really desire? you know, to do what is right in this scenario and in this situation. Because dude was willing to leave his job. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to use the resources I can get to the extent to where you say you're not going to give me no more. And then I'm still going to keep going until I feel like I've accomplished what I'm called to accomplish. So that's what was going on. I mean, you enter into like realizing that these children are, one, we know that children are vulnerable. And we know that the Lord would even say to the point where someone who causes these children to sin should be have a milestone tied around their necks and thrown into water. You know, it's like the worst judgment ever should come upon those who affect children. And they really bring that home with the film, because they show the children from camera angles in the most loneliest, vulnerable places and positions, you know, dark bedroom, corner of the bed, and the child is not safe because the one who's looking at them is a predator and who's going to use them and do as they please with this child. And they're talked about as though, you know, they really are just a tool to hand off for pleasure up until the next one. You know, take it as you will. One of the things that really rocked me, like, is how, like, as artists, we tend to play character roles at times. You know what I'm saying? Like, we'll do that with our music. We'll do that as we write. We'll do that even in ministry at times when we're interacting with people, you know, like, but this dude as an undercover had to play a pedophile. Like, he had to play someone who sought pleasure from these things and someone who could relate to the person on the other side of the conversation.
You know, so that's how, so it was an undercover that kind of was exposing it.
Yes. Dude was an undercover. Like, that's how he learned through being a government agent on how to be an undercover and how to basically act as a pedophile. You know, that was his process. So anyway, he had to deal with being that and then sitting in front of that as well. And even being looked at as that when he went to meet the children. You know, like, by the children. Like, he had to deal with being looked at as the new predator that was going to devour them and do as he pleased with them, because he had to vet the children. You know, he had to be that person the whole time until the end, when finally the arrest would happen or the salvation of the child would occur. Then he was able to, you know, he would mention, I saw so many interviews, but one of them, he mentioned that he would just, usually he would burst into tears right away in another room, or about an hour later it would hit him and he would just begin to weep. You know, he talked about having to go to therapy in the beginning to help remove the vision of his children's faces from the children he was saving, you know. But then he wound up reversing that, and now he actually uses that as more hunger, because he's not so much in the field, I don't think, either. I think he's more behind the scenes helping to facilitate money that comes into those organizations that are on the ground in those areas already. So that's the way he's kind of transitioned. But yeah, the children eventually are saved. He goes through stuff that I couldn't even imagine, you know, having to go through like remote areas in Colombia in jungle where rebels live. You know, this is like the worst stuff you could think of as far as having to face. And he goes in as a physician and no doctor skills, just kind of talking, looking around, and he winds up saving a little girl. And it's amazing, man. The thought that both things under God's sovereignty can occur just kind of, you know, kind of messes with you, you know, at the same time, because you're like, wow, Lord, you know that there will be real judgment for these acts of wickedness. Scripture is full of certainty and you know, to convince us that there will be real judgment one day for this kind of wickedness. But man, it's like the Psalms say, you know, how long, Lord, will the wicked prosper? Will they continue to do as they please? I mean, they set up their nets and they end up catching themselves in it. But we know that they catch themselves in it at the judgment. That feels like forever from now. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much to still be seen and suffer through. You have to have a suffering theology, a theology of suffering, acknowledging the sinfulness of man, and a well-balanced perspective of who our enemy is, like we're talking about, and to see God as glorious and kind and loving, even in the midst of this. Because it's wild, fam. It's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to say something about that, but I want to ask a question first. Like I haven't seen the movie. I've seen trailers and different things, and I've heard enough people talk about it, so I know when I go see it what to expect. But if I'm not mistaken, was there actual footage of like they were showing um, um, like actual footage of kids getting snatched, like real footage,
Oh
like not
yeah, yeah. Now they start that. They start the movie with that kind of film. I mean, but you can see that on YouTube. That's what it looked like. It looked like YouTube clips of children being snatched through like videos, like home videos and stuff, or store videos. Some of those I had actually seen before, but it definitely starts with the credits. Has as the introduction series, like it's just those images of people, of kids being taken, like people riding up on a motorcycle and snatching a kid, and vroom, they take off, they're gone. You never see them again. But then there's also real footage at the end of when they caught when they set up the island setup. When they got and they were able to save 54 children at
wow.
one time with that setup, and they took some of the big wigs that were the traffickers off the field, basically off the playing field.
Hmm.
Yeah. So there was definitely real footage throughout. I mean, the dude actually had his phone for one of the interactions where he recorded the entire thing. So
Wow,
he has raw footage of that.
that's crazy. And what countries was he mostly in? Like where is this taking place?
Mexico and Colombia
Okay,
for the movie,
right for the
and
movie.
and the U.S. There was some California, but yeah, Mexico and Colombia.
All right, so there's a comment I'd love you to respond to, Strat. Uh, it says this is a movie. This is Willow Apodosis. This is a movie made by a Mormon starring a Catholic. I believe in child trafficking, but I don't believe it's prevalent. My friend claims Oprah has children slaves. This Fox News babble.
Uh,
What would your response be to that?
I mean, I don't even understand. Like, that sounds like babble. It's like,
Yeah,
how you talking about? If this child trafficking is real, then it's real. It's either real or it's not. And if the movie is dealing with it, and it was a real occurrence, and it's based on true events, then what are we really talking about here? Like, what do you mean by this question or this statement? Like, Fox, Mormon, Catholics. I mean, I would hope that Mormons, Catholics, Fox News, everybody, Oprah, all of them included, think that child trafficking is wicked. I would hope so. I would hope you,
mm-hmm.
Willow Apodosis, think that child trafficking is wicked. And if so, then this movie should be promoted by you because it's pointing out how wicked it is. What do you consider to be prevalent? I mean, what do you consider, like, is 5 children prevalent? Is 100 prevalent? Is 2,000? Is 3 million? I mean, what's the number that would to you suffice people being worked up about the fact that it's happening?
Yeah. So I would say, just to be clear, thank you for your comment. Um, just the dictionary definition of prevalent means widespread, of wide extent or occurrence in general use or acceptance. All right, so that's pretty much the dictionary. So when you say I believe, but I don't believe it's prevalent, here's the challenge with statements like that. And um, and again, I'm not trying to belittle you, but who are you that you don't have a grasp on probably what happens in your neighborhood, to let alone like what to be able to have the sort of authority to say what happens in the world. Like you do realize we're talking about billions of people live on this planet. You probably couldn't name 100 Christians or 100 people without serious effort of thinking through 100 individual people. So the statement of I think I believe, but I don't think it's prevalent is more, first of all, it's preference, but it's a statement of ignorance. And it's a statement of arrogance in this sense. You are talking as if you understand what's happening in the world, but only God has the kind of bandwidth to know how prevalent these things are. Child trafficking is not something that any movie can make light of or diminish, because there are millions of people who are living in this world. I don't know where you're from or where you live, but this is what I mean about like political, what me and Strat call theological. Like there's this, we put everything in like these political religious boxes. This isn't about, and Strat alluded to this, this isn't about politics or religion, it's about humanity, right? So if you're a believer, you're made in the image of God. If you're not a Christian and you don't have that kind of understanding of the foundation of humanity, we're still people worthy of dignity and respect. And I would hope that, I don't know who you are, Willow, I would hope that if you have children, that the Lord doesn't prove you wrong by something happening to them. I mean, we all run the risk. God forbid that, but we have to be careful when we start talking about what's this and that. I got 3 boys that, you know, I can't just assume. I thank the Lord all the time that they haven't had to walk in, be in a school and someone walks in and shoots their school up. And it's not because I live in a great area, but because God is merciful that way.
I mean, if you think this won't affect you eventually, we live in a society. Think about that. We live in a society where a lot of people think it's okay to take children and do as they please with them. Like, even if a lot of people was 1,000 or 500 or 100 people, that's a lot of people who think that's okay. And you're talking about people who got a lot of money that are involved in doing this and making this happen. And there's evidence for it. It's not like, you know, this movie just came up with something out of nowhere. You know, there's documentation showing that this is happening and has been happening for a long time. So
I think that's the kind of way that we just, you know, kind of turn our, for lack of a better phrase, we have the luxury of determining, well, I don't know if as if like what I think about it is the ultimate authority on the issue. The people who live in these, you know, I've been to India twice, Bolivia, I've been to some poor countries, and I've realized like, wow, I thought I knew what poor was.
Right.
Until I went to these countries. And so,
plus whatever for Fox News, man. Whatever for Fox News. Like, who's talking about any news station? Like, all the news stations was covering the story when it actually happened.
Yeah, right.
When it really happened, all of them covered it. So, what are we talking about right now?
Right. So again, I think just it's a human issue. It's a human issue. It's about being a decent human being, irrespective of your morality, even irrespective of your religious conviction. There's a sense of being a decent human being and wanting to, like, it, at the very least, let Whitney Houston's statement, "I believe the children are our future,"
right,
kind of play out, right? And so, I would want that for my boys. I want that for them. I want that for the grandbabies, you know, that you got, Strack, which I'll see them next week, you know.
Amen. That's what I'm talking about.
I want that for them. So, having said that, you said something, Strack, I said I wanted to comment on. I'm hesitant if I want to comment on it now or say this, but I'm gonna say it now so I don't forget. You know, when you talk about this, it's kind of, you didn't use this word, but you said it's kind of wild that you have God's sovereignty over this, allowing this, but also, and you know, I think I really believe this, and we don't know this about God because we've never seen him or seen his wrath play out in a way outside of the cross and the scenes that we read in the scriptures, from the flood, Noah, from Genesis, 7 and so forth, 6 through 9 or whatever. So, but you know, I really believe that God's ability or willingness to tolerate evil is not, and you're not saying this, I'm just saying this in general, it's not an indictment of his character or something that we should be confused with. I think God's willingness to allow evil, which is pure evil, like, first of all, we don't even know what evil is unless we get it from above, right? Our understanding of evil comes from his revelation of it. Mm-hmm. But I think his willingness to allow significant evil like this to happen in the world is directly connected to the scope of his judgment that he knows is coming.
Right.
So like the Lord, like God knew that Jesus was coming and was going to pay the penalty for all sin, right? It would be effective only for those who believe, but it would cover the sin of all humanity. And so God was willing to be patient and allow ridiculous sin because he knew at some point the penalty is going to come, the punishment that's going to satisfy my perspective, satisfy my wrath against sin. But then I think the judgment, the second coming, I think hell is going to be so vicious and so. And hear me when I say this, because I'm not saying this in a positive sense in general. I think hell is going, and God's wrath is going to be so worth it that the tolerance of evil, that or the slowness that we can think God has towards punishing this kind of evil,
Yeah.
I think we won't feel that way
Yeah.
when we see it in eternity. And let me say one more thing. In Romans 8:18, Paul says this: I consider that our present sufferings are not worth being compared to the glory that will be revealed. So he's saying our sufferings are not worth comparing to the glory that he saw in the third heaven when he was caught up in the third heaven, which he talks about in 2 Corinthians 12. He's saying
Right.
the glory that's coming is greater than the suffering we're experiencing. I'm going to take that logic and make it a principle and flip it. The wrath that is coming
Right.
is way more significant than the sin that we're seeing happen, that people
Right.
seem like they're essentially getting away.
Yeah. I mean, when we look at humanity in our own hearts who are capable, we are capable of doing wicked things within ourselves. Like, we know this. And yet we look at it and we're like, yo, this is evil. You know what I'm saying? I think we would make a huge mistake to think that while God's grace can be sufficient, his judgment isn't.
Right. There it is.
That would be a huge mistake. The Lord's
Yeah.
judgment is sufficient for the wickedness that has occurred and has continued to occur throughout existence.
100.
The minute the Lord's law was violated, that, people or his creation turned against him, there was judgment to come for all that would occur and happen after that. And I think I'm finally, like, maybe I'm just realizing that we've just been sheltered, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, we've just,
Yeah,
I
what
think
do you think?
we've known this for a while, but just from the realities of life, like you read scripture and you see the wickedness of man over and over and over again. And you're like, yeah, but we're so far removed from it in one way, in one sense. Like, everything is hidden now. So if abortion is the equivalent of child sacrifice, think about how cleaned up it is and hidden it is in consideration to how it was done when they were offered to Moloch.
Right.
Like, the difference is just crazy because it's so, like, hidden and sheltered. And even death, we don't deal with death no more, as a people. Nobody dies in our home no more. The grandma don't die at the crib. Like, it's in a hospital cold room by themselves, and then we get rid of their bodies and it's gone. Like, we don't think about it. So I just think that the Lord is waking us up and showing us how evil things really are. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't think they're that evil. Like, there's because we've learned to live and be kind of how do you call it? Modernized, or not modern, but civilized is the term, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've learned to live
Civilized evil,
civilized.
right? Yeah.
What is civilized? Who determines what is civilized?
Right.
We determine what is civilized, because I would argue that we do even more wicked things, if not as wicked things, as people have done throughout history.
And 100%.
We just do it differently. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's all. Like, we're better at hiding it, maybe. I don't know. Like, technology has made things crazy. So yeah, I think that's what's going on, man. I think the Lord is just revealing how wicked things really are, man, because it shows our need for him all the more. It shows our need for the cross all the more.
And you know what else to add to that? I think the other thing that the Lord is doing, what's happening is we're getting exposed to our hypocrisy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we are selective in our outrage.
Right.
So you might be offended that someone's woke, but you'll downplay sex trafficking, right?
Right.
You'll be outraged that someone cut you off on the road, but you won't be offended at the way certain people are treated in society,
Right.
but they're not directly connected to you. And so what the Lord reveals is we just don't love our neighbors as ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's what when we deal with these things, that's the reality. Like, the Lord is exposing how much we're not like him. So thank God that he's forgiving us because we're not there, because we should be broken at that reality, right? But
Yeah.
it also shows, I think, again, going back to what we were talking about, I think because this stuff was happening when Jesus was around, right?
Right.
He didn't stop it. Then there was a lot of stuff that happened that he didn't stop even then. And I think it's because the sufficiency of God's wrath is going to clear everything up. No
Yeah.
one's going to be in heaven feeling like some people got away with something. They
No.
didn't get punished enough on earth. It's like, nah, when we see the wrath that they will experience, we'll be like, okay, yeah, well, I'm good with it. I'm good with this. And I think I want to prove that point by reading a passage. But I think we have to realize that we just are selective in our outrage. We're selective in our holiness. The things that bother us, and that we, you'll take up the issue of abortion, but not the issue of the way people are treated at the border, right?
Yeah, we're
You'll care
selective of
about,
our info,
yeah, we're
what we
just
take
selective.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think on one level, some of this is just exposing our unwillingness slash inability to love our neighbors as ourselves and all of that. But let me
This is
read to you. Go ahead.
real quick before you go there. This is the kind of film that like is kind of earth shattering. You know what I'm saying? Like it shatters your world and how you view things. You know, because if you can wake up, like if I can wake up tomorrow and not think about those children, something's wrong with me. You know what I'm saying? Like because it's happening. You know, and this film just sheds the light on it and says, look, this is real right now while you're chilling in your crib. There's a little kid somewhere clammed up in the corner, fearing the next moment that door opens because he knows what's going to happen to him.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like you can't ignore that. And that's what this film does to you. That's what these kind of movies do. That's what this kind of creativity does.
100%, brother. And I think one of the reasons why, circling back on the point about the Lord letting this happen, here's what Revelation 22 says. I would put it on the screen, but it just takes too many verses. It says, then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the Lamb of God, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, through the middle of the street of the city. Also on either side of the river, the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And night will be no more. They will need no lamp of light or sun, for the Lord will be their light, and they will reign forever. So there's a sense where the end of the Bible, the end of our book of hope, is essentially a statement in verse verse 2, that says that the leaves of the tree of life, were for the healing of the nations, right? So there's a sense where God is not only going to bring about his wrath on evildoers, those who experienced the wrath from people that he allowed to happen, he will have literal fruit that is there that we will eat, that is for the healing of the nations. So the tree of life that mankind was not allowed to eat when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden is now in eternity, we eat fruit from that tree, and that will heal us. So there's a degree in which I think the Lord, because he knows what we're going to do, I think is, and what he has for us is going to help us.
Right.
Having said that, I do want to say, I wanted to talk about something, but I don't think I'm going to go there. I was going to talk about what I believe to be the fascination of sex with children, but I'm actually not going to go there. What I am going to do is talk about why believers should care about this issue, right? Why should just a run-of-the-mill professing believer, professing Christian, or if you're a fear of the Lordian like me, right? Whatever you are, like, why we should care about this issue, whether we know someone that's gone through it or not. I want to read you just a few verses from Matthew 18. And there's one verse that Jesus says something that I don't hear talked about of all people, but it is talked about of children. Here's what he says, and I could be wrong on that, but here's what he says in Matthew 18. He says, at the time the disciples came to Jesus, at that time the disciples came to Jesus saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them. And he said, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth. And then you skip a couple verses and he says this in verse 10. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. So this is where we get the concept of guardian angels, right? But I don't know of, and I could be wrong, Strike, I don't know of any credible Bible passages that are accurately exegeted that talk like angels are with every human being. But it does say children. It says, this is what he says. He says, which I think is really interesting when you really think about what Jesus is saying here. But he's saying in Matthew 18:10, he's saying this. See to it that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who's in heaven. So these little ones, these children, have angels assigned to them that are communicating with God. They are witnesses of what's happening to these children, and they tell these things to God. That's what, not that God needs them, but that's how God works through the divine council. He has jobs for everyone and lets them share in his sovereignty to some degree. And by that, I don't mean they're sovereign, but he is sovereign, but he allows them to participate in it, just like he allows us. And so here you have this picture of children whom Jesus says are significantly important. Like the metaphor of what it means, what you have to be to go to heaven is children. This is what he said. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So he's using the humility of children as an analogy for how we must be, and it's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, Hebrews 1:14 alludes to the idea that ministering spirits are sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation. Mm-hmm. So there is a way where the angels do minister to us.
Yeah. Not all humanity, just us, though.
Those who are to inherit in salvation. Yeah. That's where I was. You had asked about if I had seen any text. That's the only thing that I could think of that would allude to the idea of a guardian angel. That perspective. But the concept of the angels seeing, the children's angels seeing what they're seeing and before the face of the Lord, like there is a closeness between God and children that we see even in the life of Christ. Mm-hmm. So there is a special place there because of the way children interact even with their parents. Like there's a desire for the fulfillment of their needs. I think that is where us in our faith are able to be as children in the fulfillment of our needs. Where do we go for these things? Where do we go for when we need? We go to the Lord, and we believe in faith that he is the supplier of all that we need and the sustainer of our lives. And that's how children function with their parents. They're the suppliers of all that they need and the sustainer of their lives. So that's us having faith like children.
Yeah, and I think the other reason why we should care is because the moniker of children is how God relates to us.
Amen.
Children of God.
Amen.
We pray our Father, like we're his son.
Adopted children.
We're adopted children. Amen. So the fundamental relational component to our eternal identity and our salvation is one of we're children and he's our Father.
Right.
So there is a sense where the analogy of children is so important to God that all humanity that belong to him are considered his children, his sons and daughters. And so when we think about what happens to children, we need to, I think, pray that God would give us his heart for children. Yes. not
Right.
his heart for our children,
Mm.
because I naturally have a heart for my kids. I've always loved kids. I've always worked with kids. I've always loved it. But when I had my boys, my love for them was so great. It was like I hate other kids. And it's not that I hate other kids, but I don't love other kids like my own kids.
Right.
But I still love children. I love kids. But so I think we need to have that heart, because the reality is, like, the children dynamic is big to God.
Yeah.
And I think he says, like, he makes it clear, like, if you get, so he says, if you get one of these little ones to believe in me to sin. So imagine how many of these
Right.
kids that, like, grew up in a Christian home and may have believed in Jesus at the time, and you're making them sin.
It's wild because I had mentioned this passage a few days ago to Flora because we were talking about the subject, and in the film, Caviezel actually says it. He's the one who plays Tim Ballard,
Uh-huh.
and he says the actual text, like, to the one dude that's about to get arrested, and the guy has like, "What are you talking about?" So, but it's just like you're to what you're saying, the weightiness of affecting one of these little ones, who are just being introduced into the world. They're just learning the world. They're just learning existence. They're just, I mean, they just figuring out that they got certain body parts, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, go ahead, man.
Now, I just think, as people who have experienced this in our own lives in different ways,
Yeah.
obviously it's going to matter to us. So my appeal to you, fellow believer, if you're watching, is not to get caught up in thinking about this from who directed the movie
Yeah, don't believe the hype, man.
or
Don't
who
believe
went
the
to
hype.
the party. Like, this is a second commandment violation.
Word.
This is a second commandment violation. And as long as that exists, I don't care who people voted for that committed, what religion is documenting it. It doesn't matter. We know what truth is, and these are second commandment violations. And may we grow in the kind of heart for the world. Obviously, we can't be Jim Caviezel or the real God, but we can at least offer a prayer up on occasion for those who are suffering in this way.
Yeah.
That just God would be there with them and comfort them, because some of them die in that position. They die in that state. They don't ever get rescued.
Yeah.
The 54 kids that got rescued, praise God, but there are 54,000 that don't. That just end up becoming adults in that world.
Yeah. For people who are upset about the film being out there, like, I hope that you're more upset about what the film is talking about than you are about the film being out. Like, if not, you really need to self-examine and see, what works up your heart, what gets you going. Like, you really need to self-examine, because if the fact that the film is out there and making a big deal of sex trafficking or children trafficking, if that is bothering you, what's wrong with you? Like,
Right.
what happened to you? I don't get it, man. Like, that don't make no sense to me. There was no mentioning of QAnon. There was no political bent. There was no party mentioned. There was nothing. It was just about saving two little kids, and as many kids as you could save from pedophiles, people who want to rape and abuse children. Like,
That's the real. And I think that's what it boils down to. So I think you don't need to feel overwhelmed, like you can't do anything. What do I do? I think I just want to start praying.
right.
A bit more, just mentioning it, because I can always pray and mention those who are the victims of these kinds of things.
Consider how many more people are praying now about this topic because of the movie.
100%.
Because of the movie. I mean,
How many more people are now supporting organizations that
and
do?
if you, I know sometimes as believers, like, we have a tendency to talk about prayer like it's the last option. Like, I can't do nothing else. All I gotta do is pray now. Like, fam, we cannot forget that prayer is what we're called to do. Like, we're not called to run out there and go save somebody from the jungle. Like, that's not the commandment. The command was to pray, to come unto the Lord in prayer. And
Well
that's the main work that we do. What's done other than that is from other gifts and works that the Lord has set apart for us to do. But the main thing we do as believers is go before the Lord. And if this movie has caused however many more people to now go before the Lord on behalf of this topic and this issue, and as Christians, we should believe that the Lord will move and make things happen for these children. So,
mission accomplished.
word up. That's where
I'm
I'm
so
at.
glad, because there are times I'm like, Dad, Lord, I wish you let this joint blow up. I'm so glad that this movie is #1 in the box office, or number
Right.
2. I'm so
Man, they
glad.
moved it. I know they moved it to the big theater out here because I know the Angel Studios never gets the big spot. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that they moved it there and it's already, what, 3 weeks in or something like that?
Yeah.
That says a lot, man. That says a lot.
And I think it's going to move people, that because there are people who are in positions to take more action.
Yeah.
And I think this movie is going to force their hand, and I'm grateful for
Yeah.
that.
It addresses that somewhat in the movie too. Like one of the dudes who's a philanthropist and kind of likes to play, you know, a cop type dude, but he's a billionaire, and they use him to help fund the island idea. And but they got him through conviction, like making him feel the guilt of what is happening. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you gonna turn away because the government ain't involved no more, fam. But look at this little girl. You tell me you can walk away from what this little girl is facing right now. And
Right.
that made my man move. You know what I mean? So you either love your money or you love God, man. Word up. Like it.
I tell you what, when the Lord said the root of, I mean, you've heard me say this time and time
Facts.
again, that America's original sin is not racism. It's consumerism. It's greed.
Yeah, the love of money.
It's mammon over the Messiah, man.
Yeah.
Everything you can trace, everything. Even now, this is sidebar, right? So since we were talking about Hollywood, even now, this Hollywood strike, you know what's so funny is that Hollywood, the irony, like the Lord is such a, I love when he does stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
So here you got those in Hollywood who were just big mouthing, like they're talking to everybody what they need to do and how they need to be about this and agree with all these things and agree with pronoun, all this stuff that like is just against your own personal conviction. They call it a liberal left, the liberal, all this stuff. They think because they're famous that everything they say is important.
Right.
Nah, man, I like what you say when someone else wrote it for you and you acting it out. That's when it's important to me. Outside of that, I don't care what you say. But what I love is that now, even though that group, they're on strike.
Yeah.
Hollywood is on the biggest strike that it's had in 63 years. And you know why? Because of greed.
Right.
Streaming has rocked the industry, and these companies are trying to just be greedy. There's this thing that they will take an AI image of you, pay you $100 as like which you'd normally get in the crowd of a movie. You get $100. But once they own your face, they can use your face as a crowd stand-in from AI forever and have only paid you $100 for it.
That's crazy.
And that's what they're doing. It's all greed. It's all money. And that's what everything revolves around that. It's corporate greed. And now these actors who were self-righteously judging everybody else who doesn't agree, now they're wanting you to give up your streaming services because they're on strike. And one Hollywood mogul was like, we're going to let them starve out because we think everybody's rich. They're not rich.
Right.
It's like 1% of the actors are rich. Everybody else, it's a job like them. If they don't work, they don't eat. Just like if you don't work for 3 months and you ain't got no stocks and no savings, you're going to lose your home. The average person doesn't have 3 months of backup.
Yep. And the middle class is thinning all the more. Like you either real rich or you real poor. You know what I'm saying? Like
trying to get that passive income hustle on. So,
you know what I mean,
saying all that to say, it's just interesting that how when it was about all that big talk and all the actors and actresses saying this, and the whole time they're getting flunked now, right?
Yeah.
All of them, and even all the actors and actresses now it's like, oh, the equity, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's about equity. Now equity is real. Now, so it's just funny to me how the Lord does that. But
it's cool to watch like a lot of dudes that are, you know, big time faces in Hollywood too. They're starting to say things that are contrary. Like Denzel Washington, like Mark Wahlberg, you know, dudes are starting to rise up and say things like, hold on, like y'all try to destroy the American family. Like y'all trying to destroy people's lives while, they're trying to be good husbands and good fathers. You know what I mean? So they're seeing it and actually starting to talk about how jacked up things are, which is, it's encouraging. It's encouraging, at least to see some good in humanity still coming out. You know what I'm saying? Especially from those people.
Well said. No, I agree, bro. Hey, man, appreciate your heart, man. Always love
Yes,
your
sir.
heart.
Yes, sir.
Looking forward to continuing this. Next week episode is going to be crazy, and y'all see why next week.
Yeah.
We got a crazy episode for y'all next week. So I'm looking forward to that. And but man, we appreciate y'all. Thank you for rolling with us. Thank you for being patient as we miss a couple episodes here and there. Please support us on Patreon. The link will be in the description. Please look out for this bad boy. This drops next Friday. However, if you follow me on Bandcamp, which will be a link will be in the description, I may release this joint before for next Friday. But this is, I'm warning you, do not listen to this album. If you're on Bandcamp, you might get it early, maybe a week early. But for everyone else, everywhere next Friday, we appreciate y'all. Thanks for riding with us. You know what I'm saying? Having said all of that, I'm Kirk Kennedy.
Hey.
He's Track the Wolverine.
Come on already.
And we're out of here, y'all. Cross-examine. Grace and peace.
Peace.